afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our latest webinar on looking after your mental health. Today, we are talking about behaviour on living a rewarding life. Behaviour today. The speaker is Dr. William Davies, Head of Applied Clinical Psychology at the APT, and I am Amy George, Deputy Director here at the APT. So the speaker is Dr. William Davies. He is a consultant psychologist and Head of Applied Clinical Psychology at the APT. Post-qualification courses written by him have been studied by over 125,000 mental health professionals, meaning that his input has influenced interventions with literally millions of people. So it is all yours, Will. Are you okay to start sharing your screen?
Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Ames. I'll see if I can share my screen. Great. Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks for coming. And today it's Living a Rewarding Life, Part 2, Behaviour. And behaviour is so important, isn't it? Because what we do is effectively our life. Since we were together last week, of course, Prince Philip has died, Duke of Edinburgh, and all the tributes, everything that is said about him is all about what he did, his behaviour. Not about what he thought particularly, or his relationships, mainly about his behaviour. And that figures. It's the same for all of us. What we do is, in fact, our life. More to the point, if we change what we do, then of course we change our lives. So it's a big, important topic we've got 50 odd minutes to look at. Just before we start, though, this is in a series of 4. So 2 weeks ago, it was part 1, which was biology. We're talking about biological factors, mainly sleep. In 2 weeks' time, it'll be part 3, all about relationships, which is obviously extremely important. And 2 weeks after that will be part 4, our thinking style. And this series of courses every 2 weeks is primarily for mental health professionals, but importantly, everybody is absolutely welcome. Whether mental health professional or not, everybody is absolutely welcome. So let's have a look at behaviour, and I'm quite fond of quotes. And John Lennon said that life is what happens while we are busy making other plans, which is about it, isn't it? And I've divided this presentation into 3 parts: CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, and then what preceded CBT, namely behaviour therapy, and what preceded that, which was philosophy and what great thinkers had to say about what we should do with our lives, our behaviour. Before we start, though, a quote from Jeremy Bentham. Jeremy Bentham was the guy who founded UCL, University College London, which is where I did my first degree. So I'd like to think that he had everything worked out, but he was very into hedonism. Nature has placed mankind under the governance of 2 sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. It is for them alone to point out what we ought to do, as well as to determine what we shall do. So it's almost like a forerunner of behaviorism in a very sort of interesting way. But I don't think that is all there is to it, is there? Hedonism is an interesting concept where the hedon bit comes from the Greek for pleasure, and the ism, we all know about isms. So it's people who are into pleasure, just go pleasure seeking. And I'm not sure that always works out for people. The more you look for pleasure sometimes, the more difficult it becomes to find it. But we'll come back to that perhaps. Let's have a look. Let's move on and look at part 1 of our 3 parts about CBT. One of the core concepts in CBT is diary keeping. And it's not just writing a diary like many of us do. We just record what we've done or what we think is interesting. It's more about having at least 2 columns, one column headed behaviour and one column headed mood. So you might be interested to see if you're rating your mood as 7 out of 10, which a lot of people would be quite pleased with 7 out of 10. That's not at all bad. Well, what were you doing during that time? Well, playing computer games or whatever it might be. Mood of 3 out of 10. Well, equally, you might be interested to see what goes on there. Well, I was watching TV, or this imaginary person was watching TV. And such an imaginary person might say, well, I'm much better off playing Fortnite than I am in watching television. I'm going to spend all my time playing Fortnite. And thereby comes the problem, because there's obviously more to it than that. If you were to spend all your time playing Fortnite, well, if you're my grandson, you'd be very happy indeed. But by and large, most people wouldn't be that happy spending all their time doing one particular thing that came out well on their diary keeping. So there's obviously more to it than that. But on the other hand, diary keeping does give you some kind of an insight, doesn't it? So let's have a look. It is part of CBT, important part, gives us insights as to what works well for us, and is part of guided discovery, which we're going to look at more of. One of the interesting things about diary keeping is it is a bit tedious to do. So when we ask people to keep a diary in this kind of way, these 2 columns, then very often they don't do it because it's not very rewarding. When I've tried doing it, I don't feel like doing it either, to be honest. And especially as people ask for more sophisticated forms of diaries with 3 columns, what you're doing, what you're thinking, what your mood is. And that can be more like an administrative chore than anything therapeutic. So sometimes what we do is to adopt modified diary keeping, where we invite people to notice times when we are particularly happy, relaxed, energetic, and note down what you think is causing that. So it's really quite an interesting thing to do, that, to notice when you're on particularly good form. Have a hypothesis as to what you think is causing that good form and note it down. And if you keep noting down instances like that, you really generate quite a bank, quite a reservoir, quite a resource to look at and really sort of work out what works for you. And of course, you can do the opposite. You notice when times are particularly bad and what you're doing, in a particularly bad form and what you're doing. So you get a very good picture of what works for you and what doesn't work for you. So for me, that modified diary keeping is probably quite strong, I think. But just to go on to the other side, we said that diary keeping comes under guided discovery. And so let's have a look at a bit more about guided discovery, which is, as a therapist, is to do with asking questions that give insight. But of course, you don't have to be a therapist. You can ask questions of yourself that give you the insights. And let's have a look at what sort of questions these might be then. You might ask, what sort of activities have a good effect on you? And you can imagine if you were in a social situation or a therapeutic situation and somebody asked you that question, you'd probably come out with a proper answer. You'd have 1, 2, 3 ideas of activities that have a good effect on you, which would be interesting, useful information for yourself. Equally the opposite. What sort of activities have a bad effect on you? So it's really interesting to ask yourself these questions and to write down the answers. And of course, you can make these questions slightly richer, if you like. When are you at your most active, happy, and relaxed? Which is sort of the opposite of depression, isn't it? Active, and happy, and relaxed. What would you be doing then when you're in that kind of state? What would you typically be doing? Or maybe what would you typically be thinking? And you can ask even sort of a even richer, more evocative kind of question. This one, if there were a prize of £1 million for you, if you're able to set things up for yourself that you are active, happy and energetic and relaxed for a whole day, what sort of things might you try out? Now, I don't know what you'd put. It is an interesting question to ask, isn't it? You might say, well, I'd probably have to start the day before if I was going to do that. I'd probably have to get to bed early, have a good night's sleep, or probably not to have too much to drink the night before, get up the next morning, probably have a bit of exercise first thing, and so on. And I'd probably eat this, that, and the other, or I'd be in touch with so-and-so. And you could actually paint a nice picture of how you create yourself an active, happy, energetic day. Varies for different people, of course, but that's the beauty of asking yourself that question. And of course, once you've got the answer to that question, it's very tempting to think, well, why don't I do that then? That sounds like a good idea. Let's do that. And I think those rich questions, like that last one, no one is actually going to give it. Well, who knows? But I don't think anyone's going to give us £1 million in the near future for setting up a nice day for us. But it's a really good question to ask, to sort of stimulate a different part of the brain than normally gets stimulated by a straightforward question, like what sort of activities have a good effect on you. Can leave you a little bit flat and uninspired. So guided discovery is a very important CBT concept, very good one. Yes, and the reverse, that's right. Yes, it's important to have the reverse, actually. You know, if there's £1 million for you to set up a really horrible day for yourself, that you're constantly agitated and unhappy, what would you do? Well, that is actually interesting information, because it does tell you, in a sense, what to avoid. And we are quite good at avoiding things we need to avoid.
Julia thinks that's a very fun and interesting question to answer. Thank you, Julia.
Now, still on CBT, one thing is to avoid overload. Maybe have a case example or two, maybe. One patient who sticks in my mind, actually, I think I might have told you about this person before. She was a secretary, and she's a very conscientious secretary. She'd be at work, you know, before time, work till at least not enough time, get home, cook a nice meal for her husband and 2 children, sit down, have a bit of a meal with them, and then as soon as she possibly could, go down, it was about 5 doors down the road, to her mother, who was living on her own, cook her a meal, sit with her while she ate that, have something, keep her company till about 10 o'clock. When she'd come back home again, go to bed and get up the next morning and start the same thing again. And what do you think she was seeing me for? She was seeing me because she was depressed. And you know, when she described her day to me, I thought, well, you know, that's no wonder, really, is it? And that was overload, and not only overload, but it's kind of overload with sort of fairly unrewarding tasks. You know, was she particularly into being a legal secretary? No, not really. You know, it's a nice job, but it's not really her particular thing. You know, and did she enjoy her time with her mother? Well, yes and no, but she was feeling she should be with her family. Or did she enjoy her time with her family? Well, no, because she should be with her mother, and so on. There's just too much going on. And that sort of overload, I think we can readily understand, and in a sense, you can readily work with somebody like that to address taking off some of that load and getting a more manageable and rewarding life. Lewison said that many depressed people are depressed because they are leading depressing lives. And it kind of sounds sort of harsh, but it's not really, not meant to be. He wasn't intending to be harsh. And it is quite a useful yardstick sometimes. Just have a look at the person's life and see, well, you know, if most people were leading that life, perhaps most people would be a bit depressed. The other example that springs to mind is not just one example, actually, because at one stage I spent about 10 years working in a private clinic for people with all sorts of problems. And for a while, I seemed to get a series of people, very successful young men, not unlike the kind of chap we got here, very successful, very talented people who were invited to do all manner of things. And the invitations they got to do all manner of things were very appealing invitations. So they tended to accept the invitations, and they ended up with a whole stack of very good, very attractive tasks to do, and yet they were overloaded. But they're overloaded with these wonderful tasks to do. And what seemed to have happened was it was as though the system said, look, you've just taken on too much, and I'm going to cut you out. And they become depressed. There's a whole series like this, just become depressed by having like too many good things to do, almost as though they've kind of blown a fuse. It's a very interesting phenomenon, I think, just too much good stuff to do. So overload can take lots of different forms, I think, but we do need to avoid overload in CBT terms. Equally though, avoid underload, where there's just doesn't seem to be enough to do, that a friend of mine says, that evenings without having a drink, evenings seem to be just so long. Just not enough interesting things to do. In fact, my wife says exactly the same thing, but normally only in public, which she finds amusing. But then, so it is a question of finding good things to do. And because of that, I put together a menu of things to do. And that is at Moodmaster Co. UK, which is a sister organization to us. And they also have free things. And I think I'm going to try and click this, Amy. It might disappear me into cyberspace forever.
I'm nervous for you. Okay, give it a go.
Yeah. Well, there we are. I've clicked it. Wow. Oh, there we are. Yeah.
Yep.
That's the Moodmaster website. And if you see halfway along, it says free resources. So when you go on there, just click free resources, and you've got some great free resources. Some audios, mindfulness relaxation, guided imagery, progressive muscle relaxation. And the thing I was talking about just now, a list of things to do. And if you go there and just press the download button, you might even, there we are. It's a printable sheet of things to do. And the way I've organized it is there's various categories. Entertainment, as in watch a movie on television, watch a documentary on television and so on. Exercise, go for a walk, etc. Soothing activities like soak in the bath or whatever. Do some chores, because some people actually rather enjoy doing chores for reasons we shall have a look at later on. Do something for other people, which very often kind of benefits us for one reason and another. And mental activities, which is kind of a behavior, but it's a kind of mental behavior, isn't it? Plan my career, daydream my career, whatever it is. And there's other things like buy something from the internet or whatever. Now, this list I modestly regard as really, really good. And but when it's got about 85 different things on it, so it's a good long menu, which you should be able to find something that you feel like doing almost at any time. But I have to tell you, even though it's got 85 things on it, there's plenty of things missing. So when you read through it and say, oh, for goodness sake, it hasn't got such and such a thing that I like doing, just write it on, print it out, write it on, and it can become your list. And if there's things on there, you say, well, I'm never, ever going to do that, just cross them off. So you have a sort of almost a tailor-made, bespoke list for yourself or for your patients or for your friends or for whoever it is. And that is one of the, it's interesting, I love reading what philosophers and so on have to say about how we should spend our lives. But a lot of us are much more basic than that and just want some good ideas as to what to do. So that is a list. And if you go to Moodmaster Co. UK, you can find that list. There we are.
Everybody's loving your list, and a lot of gratitude in the chat. Thanks, everybody.
Oh, thank you.
That's nice. And there's a couple of people who like decluttering and cleaning, so that's nice.
Oh, fantastic! Yes. Yeah. Well, we're going to look at negative reinforcement in a bit, where you get reinforced by removing stuff, reinforced by removing rubbish and irritants, for instance. One final thing, I think, on CBT. Yes, it is. Final thing on CBT, and that's the concept of refining what you do. I love the idea of making some minimal changes for maximum impact. And there's a particular guy that sticks in my mind, and he is a patient who he spent a lot of his time watching television. And he said, and he was depressed. And he kind of sat in front of the television, watching television too much, as he would have it. But to cut a long story short, it wasn't really that he was doing it too much. He wasn't doing it in the right way. He just sat watching whatever came on television and feeling sort of kind of a helpless victim of his television. And again, what he did eventually was to learn to sort of guide much more closely what he watched on television. I'm just trying to remember what he ended up watching. He loved natural history programs. David Attenborough became his hero. And he loved something else as well. But it was particular programs that he watched on television. And that refinement of what he did wasn't that he sort of stopped watching television and went to the gym and did wonderful things and all that kind of stuff. Not at all. He carried on watching television, but he refined it. And that completely turned around the activity of TV watching. And I think that's a really powerful concept to, in a sense, make a minimal intervention for a maximum impact. And that refining what you do is the heading that comes under. And it's really worth having a look what sort of things like that can be done, I think. Okay, that is the end of the first section of 3. Okay, all right, Ames, shall I carry on?
Yep, super good. No, we're having some lovely positive comments coming in the chat, but no, all good here.
All good, okay. Well, let's have a look at part 2 then, behaviour therapy. This, of course, as the name suggests, is what came directly before cognitive behaviour therapy. Behaviour therapy was, it kind of replaced psychodynamic psychotherapy mostly in the, what would it be, the 60s and 70s, and then got replaced by CBT mostly. But the pendulum has swung back quite a lot, actually, and the emphasis on behaviour in CBT is more than it used to be. So this is a picture of B.F. Skinner. So 2 points, Ames, if anyone knows what his first names are. B.F. Skinner...
It's fastest finger first in the chat box.
They'll do well. Along with J.B. Watson, who is a very colourful character, it's worth looking him up wherever you want to look him up, and Ivan Pavlov of salivating dog fame. They were the people who pioneered modern behaviorism, and there's a fantastic amount of really good research and really good research findings went into this, and it's great to have a look at them.
We've got Jerry and Stephanie with, I'm sorry if I'm saying this wrong, is it Boris Frederick?
Yeah, well done, yes.
Oh, now everyone's pouring in.
Well, I wonder if they spelt it right. That'd be good, wouldn't it? It's got an H in it.
Yeah, I think the consensus seems to be B-U-R-R-H-U-S.
Exactly, yeah. So in June 2002, listed Skinner as the most influential psychologist of the 20th century. And that's, I've put a reference in there for if anyone who really wants to follow that up. But B.F. Skinner was a wonderful guy, very, very positive guy, very sort of kind and good-natured kind of guy. He wrote Walden II. It was his big book, Walden II. Oh, well, there we are. Somebody might like to say who wrote Walden. There we are, because Skinner's book was Walden II. But he spent a lot of time training pigeons to peck levers. And that yielded some really very interesting results. And being a kind and nice sort of character, he only ever trained them using positive methods. So every time not every time actually, if they pecked a lever, what they got was some very tempting morsel, which to pigeons was very tempting. Don't know what it's made of, but pigeons loved it. And so that was good. Pigeons were very happy. And I say it wasn't every time they tapped because that was the whole point. There was different intervals. So one in the first interval was a fixed interval. So it might be, for example, they'd get a food pellet, every minute. So long as they're pecking, they'd get a pellet every minute. So that would be a fixed interval schedule of 1 minute. Or you might have a fixed ratio schedule. A fixed ratio schedule would be every 30 pecks, for example, they would get a food pellet. So that'd be a fixed ratio of 30. And then the third schedule was intermittent. Wasn't a fixed interval, wasn't a fixed ratio, wasn't fixed anything. It's just every now and again. It was deliberately random. In fact, it's worked out to be random. And on random moments, so long as the pigeon had been pecking, they'd get a food pellet. And any feedback aims as to what is the strongest form of reinforcement there?
Intermittent, random, intermittent, random.
Yep, that's it. Correct.
Yep.
Wouldn't you think that, for example, you could, for example, give the pigeon a food pellet every time they peck the lever? That would be, what do they call it? Very reliable, sort of stuff, wouldn't it? Very consistent. We're always urged to be consistent. Well, that would be totally consistent, wouldn't it? Every time you peck, you get a food pellet. Nope, that isn't nearly as good as intermittent reinforcement. And you might say, well, yes, but that's pigeons. Are we pigeons? No. But it turned out that all the kind of findings that they found from pigeons, they started transplanting them to people. And what do you think? They all worked pretty much exactly the same with people. And
Sophie's commented that this is similar to slot machines, and Sarah thinks it's like online shopping.
Oh, exactly so. Well done, Sophie. That is exactly what slot machines are based on, and it's intermittent. If there's a fixed interval that you got to pay out every 5 minutes, people just rest quietly until 5 minutes came around, and then go to the slot machine. It was a fixed ratio, similar kind of thing. Intermittent, though, people are putting money in, just like pigeons are pecking levers. People are putting money into the slot machine. It's amazing. It's exactly like a pigeon pecking a lever. Wonderful example, the best example.
Hazel's worried that the pigeons are going to get fat.
Oh, very important idea, yeah. And yes, they call it satiation in the trade. You mustn't satiate your pigeon, and otherwise they're going to show no interest. It's a bit the same, I suppose. If you had a slot machine and you put your money in, and out came £10 million, you say, right, off I go. I'm not going to put any more pounds into the slot machine. So, I like to think of intermittent. Strangely, I'm very interested in suicide, because I used to see a lot of people who were suicidal, and it seems to me that intermittent reinforcement is exactly what's relevant in continuing to live life. All that we ask out of life, in a way, is that every now and again something good happens. It doesn't have to happen every day or every week or whatever it is, but every now and again there's something good should happen, and that keeps people going. Literally, it keeps people living. And if there's no reinforcement ever, the whole thing the experimenter seems to have gone home, and there's no reinforcement, then yes, it's difficult to keep going, if you like. So it translates directly, I think, from the pigeon experiments to real life, if you like. Same thing here. This, I think, is related to what we were just talking about. Goethe, the German philosopher, said that a person can withstand anything except a succession of ordinary days. So if you fixed yourself up a very nice lifestyle, and I don't know what it would be, you'd get up in the morning, have a luxury kind of breakfast, go out for your exercise, read a book, come back, have a chat with your friend, and so on. That would be very, very nice. But if every day was exactly the same, and on day 7,298, you're still getting up, going for your exercise, having a breakfast, and so on, it might be a bit tedious, and that's what Goethe reasoned.
I had a couple of comments that this is perhaps why depression has increased during lockdown.
Absolutely. It is a succession of identical days. What's the film called? Groundhog Day, isn't it? Yeah. Just keep doing the same thing.
Marie's made a point, which is good, that it makes her think of mindfulness, because it helps you find the extraordinary in the mundane, everyday things.
Oh, very good. Yes, very good.
And how would this affect prisoners?
Prisoners. Well, I think prisoners can remarkably structure their days really quite well if they put their minds to it, actually. And prisoners have an advantage that they almost always have a certain amount of exercise every day, which puts them ahead of quite a lot of people. Have the meals at the same time, so you get a nice circadian rhythm going. But of course, if they, in the intervening times, if they always do exactly the same thing in the intervening times while they're in their cells, then yes, it would be very, very tedious, wouldn't it? And that would be a succession of identical days. It's okay, though, having the pivots, in other words, the meals at the same time, the exercise at the same time. There's still plenty of times in between those times where you can have variety. So what happens, I think, it is the key, one of the key concepts is habituation. It doesn't matter how nice the chocolate is that you're eating. Once you've had 2 or 3 or 4 of them, you kind of habituate to them. They don't seem to taste just quite as nice as they did initially. Or I can think of another person who is lucky enough to have loads of money and can literally, it rather goes back to the hedonism in a way, they literally chase pleasure. And they are constantly doing pleasurable things, and pretty much the same pleasurable things. They're chasing out to the south of France or to Spain or wherever it would be, and doing very much the same thing. And does that work for them? Well, no, it doesn't actually. It doesn't seem to kind of pay off quite as you would hope it might. Most of us would say, well, I'm sure it would do for me, but no, it doesn't seem to really. It's you need more than that somehow. Now, it's still on sort of behavioral psychology, if you like, the B.F. Skinner et al. And this is a nice concept of non-contingent reinforcement. And I think this is a really important concept. And if you want to do any homework tonight, I would urge you to do this one. Non-contingent reinforcement is simply reinforcement that is not earned. So, and it turns out to be a very, very important concept. For example, if you work with challenging behavior, and if you look at the effect of non-contingent reinforcement, in other words, if you simply occasionally reinforce people who typically have challenging behavior, that actually works remarkably well. And it's the whole point is you're not reinforcing particularly, when they deserve reinforcement, which you can do as well, but just anytime, just kind of randomly, if you like. And that works remarkably well. So my homework for you, I'd suggest if you want to do some homework, is this evening, reinforce somebody who doesn't deserve it, preferably yourself, unless you especially deserve it, but think of something that would be a real reinforcer for you if you don't deserve it. Equally, if you have children or somebody you love, then especially if they don't deserve it, see if you can find something that's really reinforcing for them. Even if it's just kind of being nice or saying something nice or whatever it would be. It doesn't have to be expensive, just non-contingent reinforcement.
Zora has asked if this is a concept similar to that in RAID.
It features strongly in RAID, Sarah. Absolutely, yes, yeah. Well spotted. Very important concept. Yeah. One week we'll perhaps have a look at RAID and go through the whole thing. But yeah. One of the
Stephanie's asked, what is RAID? And I suppose you don't like to blow your own trumpet, but you are actually the author of RAID, aren't you?
Yes.
In case you wondered why you're talking about RAID. But yeah. A couple of people have asked, what is RAID?
Well, shall I say? It's a very positive way of working with people with extremely challenging behavior. So people who are typically in locked facilities because the behavior is so challenging. And it's a very positive way of addressing that. And it's very, I'm really pleased to say that it's been adopted by lots and lots and lots of such organizations. And I think it's over around about 25,000 professionals now have been through the RAID course to learn a positive way of dealing with very challenging behavior. And it's terrific because typically the patients involved are very kind of underprivileged. So to have a really good, positive way of working is excellent. We'll perhaps have a look at it someday.
And what does the acronym stand for?
Reinforce appropriate, implode disruptive. And just to, I don't want to expand, but the disruptive means behavior that is disruptive to the patient's own well-being, really, and to the well-being of those around them.
And we're still getting some really lovely comments just to all panelists.
Yeah.
I had one that says RAID is definitely the very best course they've ever come across for working with patients.
Whoa.
Lovely if that went to all panelists and attendees.
That's fantastic.
And I'll write what it stands for in chat as well, as a few people have missed that.
Have you sent that person their check?
Yes, coming later, Mark.
Lovely. Non-contingent reinforcement. Lovely. Oh, yes. Just funnily enough, I was running a RAID course, funny enough, and this was one of the most sort of frustrating moments I had. Was the person, everyone's homework was to give out some non-contingent reinforcement overnight to people who didn't deserve it. So next morning, everyone came back again, and I said, well, how did you get on with the homework? And I nominated somebody. I said, Joe, how did you get on? And Joe says, well, I was going to do it, but nobody did anything that needed reinforcing. Nobody deserved it. And I said, well, that's the whole point. The whole point of non-contingent reinforcement is it's reinforcement when the person does not necessarily deserve it. It's just random. Enough of that. Okay. I can't see what the words say. It's my Zoom bit is right over them.
I've got negative reinforcement, umbrellas and procrastination.
Oh, well, that's self-explanatory then, so that's all right. Negative reinforcement is a very important concept as negative reinforcement. You can work out for yourself, actually, whether you personally are into positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement, well, I'll give you an example. My wife, for instance, doesn't mind me saying that she is into negative reinforcement. In other words, her default position is that everything's okay unless there's something bad going on. So as long as, in which case she'll remove that thing which is bad going on, and she defaults back to a nice, happy position again. Lots of other people, default position is they're not really okay unless something good is happening. And they're into positive reinforcement. Something has to be added to their lives to kind of make it particularly worthwhile. Whereas if you're into negative reinforcement, so long as you take away stuff, take away bad stuff, that is, you are happy. Umbrellas, people are negatively reinforced for putting up an umbrella. Why? It's because it removes the rain that is falling on you. You are reinforced for putting up your umbrella because the rain is removed effectively. You're standing there happily underneath your umbrella, nice and dry, very smug. Likewise, procrastination. Procrastination is a funny one because people who are into positive reinforcement cannot understand procrastination, and they spend their lives trying to stop other people procrastinating. Whereas in fact, procrastination makes a lot of sense if you're into negative reinforcement. For example, supposing you had a presentation to make. Supposing you had a 1-hour presentation you were preparing, and you left it until perhaps the morning of the day you were making the presentation. How would you feel? You'd probably be quite sort of agitated, really, not anxious, perhaps, but slightly agitated. But each slide you wrote in your presentation would reduce your level of agitation. So each bit of work you do reduces your level of agitation. You are negatively reinforced for your work, which is fantastic. Now, supposing you'd done all this preparation a month ago, well, that thing would not apply because your level of agitation is so low anyway. Your presentation isn't due for another month yet, so you're not agitated about it yet. So every slide you do doesn't reduce any agitation, because there is no agitation there to start off with. So in a sense, procrastination it makes entire sense. You leave it until there's a nice level of agitation, and then everything you do reduces that level of agitation. There's a payoff for it. So, okay. Oh, just one final thing, I think, on this section. And it kind of follows on from procrastination. And it's looking at work in particular. And that is to do whatever task you find rewarding right now, most rewarding right now. As long as it needs doing, that is a really good time management system for most people based on that kind of behavioral psychology. You'll see in time management books and so on, what do you got to do? You've got to prioritize things. You got to do the most urgent or important or whatever it is. Everything's done by priorities. And you're sort of urged to treat yourself almost like a machine, and you go through the list. And it doesn't take account of the fact that we are mostly very variable. We have different sort of moods, and we feel like doing some things at some times, other things at other times. And so long as the task needs doing, you're best off to do whatever task you find most rewarding right now.
Monica sent a sad tale that she experienced it herself when she was a child. Her parents bought her so wanted ice skates on the same day that she got bad marks in school, but she was so guilty that she's not being able to be happy for her ice skates.
Oh, what a shame.
Yeah. But she has since come to terms with it, but it wasn't good at the time.
See, well, that's interesting, because I had a parallel experience which I interpreted differently, because the timing was slightly differently, perhaps. When I'm old enough that I had to sit the 11 plus, and my dad promised me a new bike if I passed the 11 plus, which was a common kind of thing to promise. And then he gave me this bike before the 11 plus exam. And I thought that was really good. Well, talk about non-contingent reinforcement. He just gave me this bike anyway. And I suppose that's pretty much the same as Monica, isn't it? That parents wanted to give her skates anyway. Would that be a fair comment or not really? I don't know.
That sounds like a nice comment, and I think Monica has come to grips with it, and she is using her skates now.
Oh, terrific! So it's got a happy ending. That's nice. Okay. Oh my word. So part 3 is thinkers and philosophers.
In case people wondered why you were saying, oh my word, I think you were thinking about the time, weren't you?
Well, I was. I got the time alongside there, yeah.
Yeah, we couldn't see that you were looking at the time.
Sorry, yeah. Now, okay, let's zip through philosophers and for our philosophers. Meaning. Now, this is A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. It's been a best-selling book for the last 70 years or so. Viktor Frankl was a young psychiatrist, Jewish psychiatrist in Austria, and he and his wife were both taken into concentration camps by the Nazis in the Second World War, as was his broader family. His wife died in a concentration camp, as did his family. He survived, and he wrote Man's Search for Meaning subsequently, because he worked as a doctor in the concentration camp because he was a psychiatrist. And he felt that the people who had found a meaning in what they were going through, they were the people who survived, because he was very interested in who survived and who didn't. And it didn't seem to be particularly on purely physical grounds. And it did seem to be on people who found a meaning for what they were going through. So he subsequently wrote that book. And that's which is the story. So people say, though, well, what do you mean by meaning? And other words might be goals or mission, although missions very often apply to organizations rather than, well, also to people. He's on a mission or she's on a mission. Their goals, very focused or very driven. People who are driven to do a particular thing. They have a meaning in their life. So kind of meanings that people have might be to do with work. A lot of people have work. Their children or family, looking after their children or family, looking after their friends or being a good friend. Those are the kind of meanings that people adopt very readily. And, over here we have the Sunday Times rich list, the richest people in the world. And it's amazing how many of those are 80-something. And they carry on working, even though they've got way more money than they'd ever know what to do with. They carry on working because that is their meaning in life, and or one of their meanings in life, perhaps. So, yeah, to find a meaning, a personal meaning in our life, not a general meaning for life in general, but a personal meaning for each of us. Stephen Hayes in Acceptance and Commitment Therapy says, decide on your values and principles and actively live by them. Some examples of values and principles. That's interesting, actually, because people are quite embarrassed to say what their values and principles are. So I saw a video with Russ Harris, who wrote Act Made Simple. And even he was quite embarrassed. And he's not easily embarrassed. But he was quite embarrassed to be asked what his values and principles were. So he came out with 4, all beginning with the letter C, as far as I could make out, was their common thread: connection, caring, curiosity, and contribution. I've added a few extra ones: kindness, thoughtfulness, generosity, genuine, positive, constructive. And you can see why people are embarrassed to come out with principles, because it sounds like you are claiming them. You are claiming to be this very positive person. And they normally are positive principles, because those are the ones we'd wish to adopt. But there we are. So those would be examples. Interestingly, Friedrich Nietzsche, he was way before Frankl and Hayes, and he combined both ideas. And what he said is we should live authentically and powerfully by working towards our own goals and life purpose while keeping to our values and principles. So he, in a sense, combined the two sides and came out with a very, very nice utterance like that. He came out with an awful lot, to be fair, and in his time, he was the sort of philosophical equivalent of Van Gogh, who sold not a painting in his lifetime, but lots afterwards. In his lifetime, Friedrich Nietzsche was pretty much ignored, but not now. He's quite a fashionable person now. He went out of fashion a while back because the Nazi Party in Germany in the Second World War, they adopted, they misrepresented some of what he said and just adopted it wrongly. So it's been a while since he's been able to get back into fashion. Aristotle, I think we're finishing off with Aristotle, so we might just make it. He had the concept of eudaimonia, which is sometimes translated as happiness, but more rightly, I think, would be translated as the route to happiness. And Aristotle is described variously as the most intelligent man who's ever lived and the most useful philosopher who has ever lived. So it's interesting to see what he says about the route to happiness. And he says something boils down to quite simple things, I think. You find out what you're good at, you do it as well as you can, and you do it a lot, or those things a lot, because a lot of people are good at more than one thing. So find out what you're good at, do it as well as you can, and do it lots. But I have to say, a lot of people that I see, they don't particularly, it's good to see what philosophers have to say, and it is really good, the kind of things they say, and it does have relevance right now, I think. But at the same time, in a day-to-day way, what we talked about earlier on, have a menu of things you can do, a list of things you can do, of an evening time or whatever time of day it is, when you just don't know what to do with yourself because, I don't know, it just seems to be a lot of time and nothing to do, then it's really good to have a list of things you might do, I think.
It's about time you had a challenging question, do you think?
Yeah, well, there we are. Look, we're more or less at the end.
Yeah, okay. What's the difference between a value and a principle?
Oh, I don't know. I'd lump them together like I do, values and principles.
Okay.
Yeah,
Got around that one.
just slur them together and you're okay. Yeah.
Okay. So
Okay.
this, yep, all done.
Okay. So this is it's just a partial summary, just to say that you've covered what, more or less what I said at the beginning. CBT with diary and guided discovery, refining what we do maybe, avoiding overload and underload and using a menu for what to do. Behavioral psychology with having variety and using non-contingent reinforcement, and which is, I hope somebody will do it tonight, and do what is most reinforcing right now. And what the big thinkers and philosophers have to say for themselves. Decide on a meaning for your own life. Decide on your values and principles and live by them. Find what you're good at, do those things as well as you can and do it lots. And also hedonism, actually, because the research does actually tell us, it's interesting that they've researched what the philosophers have said. And hedonism comes into its own so long as you're doing the kind of things that we've listed earlier, these three, you're having a meaning and so on, then hedonism is very much the icing on the cake and works well. All right, there we are. My only other slide, I think, Ames, is to say what we're doing next week. So there we are. Unless there's anything.
No, I think we're all good. So do you want to say what we're doing next week?
Well, actually, it's in 2 weeks' time. It's in this series. I should have said, yeah. In 2 weeks' time, it is relationships. Yeah. So we're going to have a look at relationships, and it's again one of the really important things. So we're going to see what we can do there.
Do you know what we're doing next week, or somebody told us that we should just procrastinate on it instead? Thank you, Sue.
Yeah, no, I do know what we're doing because we've got 2 parallel series going on.
Yeah.
Next week is about CBT. So alternate weeks we're doing some major therapeutic interventions, aren't we? So previously we did motivation interviewing and DBT. Well, the third one in that series is CBT. And on the other alternate weeks, we're doing sort of almost like the things to lead a rewarding life, namely, first one was biology. Second one is what we've just done, behavior. Next one is relationships.
Super. And there's been a few requests for us to do RAID. So we'll pop that in our bank of, the hour about RAID would be good.
Lovely,
so
yeah. We can do that after CBT perhaps. After.
Yeah.
So next week will be CBT. 3 weeks' time will be RAID.
Super. So just, sorry, my screen's just gone. So that's brilliant. So just as always, we want to thank you all for coming and let you know that these events are completely free of charge. But if you want to know anything else, go to apt.ac and that's our website and you can see everything you could ever want to know there. But as we say, we just love you here. We love running them. We love to see so many people here. So no, please keep coming, invite your friends. Everybody's welcome. We'll keep going for as long as we have people here and for as long as, well, we were going to do them for as long as COVID was lasting, but COVID seems to be going and we're still here, aren't we, Will?
Well, it's nice, isn't it? COVID seems to be going in the UK, but it's nice that there's people from all sorts, isn't there?
Yeah, no, it's lovely to see you all. And as we said, you'll get your certificate emailed to you by the end of the week. And if you want to see a recording, it will be at www.apt.ac/free webinars, or just pop free webinars in APT when you get there and in the search box. So you've got anything else, Will?
No, that's marvellous. Thanks, James, very much for chairing us and running it all.
No, lovely. Lovely to see you all and hope to see you next week.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Bye.